Welcome back to another episode on The Lot Show. Or, as Arjun would call it, the best podcast in the world. Today we are joined by Grace Zhou, and we're going to be talking about musical talent and how people use their talents to manage their mental health. Hi, Grace.
Hi, Sheena.
So, before we get started and start talking about how you manage your mental health, are you even musically talented?
I don't know. I would say I am pretty musically inclined. I've played the violin since I was like 7.
Oh, wow.
Which amounts to like 9 or 10 years by now. And I do play pre-professionally, so I go to pre-college and perform pretty regularly. Yeah.
Damn. So, yes, to answer my question, she is musically talented. So, you said that you started when you were 7 years old.
Yeah.
So, I'm pretty sure you've always been, like, music's been a larger part of your life if you've been doing it for that long. How have you noticed that it's helped you manage yourself, especially in high school when you were faced with a lot of, like, important things, and also you being the overachiever I know you are, how did you manage everything using music?
Sure, yeah. I think music, it's just like, it acts very much as kind of like an outlet emotionally speaking, because there's just so many like layers to, first of all, the music itself, but also kind of when you're working on it, it's a very like slow, methodical process. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, it feels a little different to regular schoolwork in the sense that you're kind of indulging like your emotions inside a different channel. Mm-hmm. I think as a kid, I mean, I wasn't that stressed anyway, so it wasn't like I used music as like a particular form of stress relief. I just thought it was like fun and enjoyable.
Yeah.
But I think especially like in middle school and high school, as I start getting busier, taking more AP classes, doing more like competition, academics, whatever, music's definitely been able to serve as kind of a more relaxing way to kind of get my feelings out. Although I will say kind of going like through high school, because I do like a lot of competitions in music and I think a lot of high stress kind of things in music, it's like it hasn't always been like a stress-free pursuit. But I think the nature of music is that it hasn't ever really been like really anxiety inducing, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up a good point that you also do compete in music, and so there's definitely going to be things that add stress there, and then when you're competing. But you did mention that, like, it wasn't necessarily anxiety-inducing and things of that sort. Do you think that when you competed for music in comparison to when you competed for, like, let's say a science competition or, like, something for math, did you notice that the music competition is just, like, you were able to flow in a better way and it just seemed calmer, or do you think it's like a similar platform that you were put on?
I think in terms of doing like science and math competitions, I'd say the preparation is pretty similar in terms of like rigor, but I think the thing about science and math is like you don't really get that level of emotional satisfaction from like solving the problems and doing it as you would get from music, because ultimately music is kind of like a performing art. So even if you're trying to perform at a high level and work hard at it and whatever, you're still kind of getting that emotional connection with the music because you're playing it and you're working on keeping it interpretive and as like, you know, as emotionally original as possible. So I'd say there's definitely kind of a difference in terms of how either of them is processed. And for me, I just find like performing and like doing competitions in music more enjoyable personally because I get to keep engaging with kind of that emotional connection that I have with it. Yeah.
Are you a music major?
I am actually, I'm doing a double major probably.
Oh, okay.
In classics and chemistry.
Oh.
But I am going to keep doing music in college a lot. So competitions, orchestra, chamber music, yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. And I'm not as musically talented as you. I taught myself the piano, and that's the majority of what I've done. What?
Show us your skills.
Oh, no. But I do have a keyboard at home, but my brother uses it now. But I've always done...
So bad.
Isn't that the
Don't mind the background noise of Andrew messing around with his chair. But for me, I always did dance. I did dance for 10 years, and then I quit because I had to focus on work, and I did sports, but that's another thing. But when I did dance competitions, I also felt like it helped me basically apply everything I was feeling into an emotional piece of like work. And I noticed that a lot of the times whenever I did solos or anything of the sort, they would always reflect my emotions. Sometimes I would do very happy pieces and they would contrast my like emotions on the exterior, but internally I would always be like, oh, like this represents what I've been feeling. And sometimes I do very contemporary, like little melodramatic sad pieces, but they would definitely be showing that I was going through something. And actually that's one of my wishes, that I continued in high school, because I think it would have helped me apply all my emotions and helped me project better so I could release a lot of the emotions. But did you notice that, as you were saying, that you like you have an emotional release and you have an emotional connection to the pieces that you are pursuing and you worked on for a while?
Yeah.
Do you sometimes notice that what you've been feeling reflects in what you're doing, or do you think you were always been like forced to do certain pieces, like it wasn't up to your choice, and so you were like, it was harder for you to go that way?
I would say for me personally, there's like a certain like disconnect that I'm able to get between my own emotions and like that of the pieces I'm playing. I think because generally like I'm not that much of like a very emotional person.
Fair.
Like I like don't feel the need to experience that many, but like I think in pieces that I play, especially, like I'm able to kind of recreate the character of the piece without having to like channel my own emotions really strongly. But I think in some sense it does help me channel like what I'm feeling anyway, because it's just, I feel like it's just kind of an outlet in general. Like even if I'm playing like a sad piece and I'm feeling very like upbeat, I can get out the feeling, and at the same time it kind of like it's therapeutic still. In a sense. Like I don't know if that makes sense. It seems kind of contradictory. But like I think it's like in the end it's like it's all emotion, and there's always that kind of connection that you're able to feel with the music. Yeah.
Honestly, your opinion and your way of dealing with emotions is very insightful for me, because I am such an emotional person. Like I would say I was not, but occasionally like the certain things just get me, and I feel like I project a lot of my emotions on other people, and I've noticed that for me, I've been able to connect my emotions to everything, even when I'm drawing, when I'm writing. So it's really cool to me to hear that. Like, other people don't do that. Like, and I feel like when you were saying that even if you're playing a sad piece, you can feel upbeat on the inside. I think it's also like the satisfaction once you complete the piece, when you're like, oh my god, I just performed that in front of people and I successfully did the entire thing. I think that reflection of success is the most important part.
For sure.
So, do you think that success is like something that you've always like kind of strived for, like being able to completely perform a piece you've been working on for a while?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, like performing is a big part of playing for me. I think it's one of my favorite things to do. And I think just like for all musicians, there's a kind of satisfaction that comes out of being able to really share kind of that music with an audience. And I feel like the idea of like being able to, you know, finish it off and like successfully communicate these ideas and kind of pull off something that other people can then appreciate is kind of something that all musicians really strive for. And it does give like kind of a satisfaction. I think we say there's definitely like, I think there's something like called a post-performance high or something, and it's like there's definitely a strong like endorphin rush after you finish playing, and you feel good about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that Jen sings, so do you...
Hasn't talked the whole
Sorry to put you on. But do you feel similar things whenever you perform? Because I know you're also, like, you've performed a decent amount, so...
Yeah, it's mostly been in, like, choir settings, because, you know, I'm in the choir.
Crazy, I know.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I've been doing choir for, like, 7 years now, I think. And there's definitely that post-performance high that happens. It's just, like... But, like, the thing is, it's so different when you're out there solo performing and when you're in, like, a group setting, because it's, like... Solo, it's, like, if you mess up, oh, you messed up. Like, you're aware of it. But in, like, a group setting, everything comes together, and being able to show, like, the harmonies and, like, unison and, like, all the different dynamics that you've incorporated throughout the year, it's really, like, oh,
Pleasant.
I did that.
Which she brings up a good point. Do you notice a difference when you're performing on your own or with other people?
Yeah. I mean, I do solo work, chamber music, and orchestra. I'd say definitely one of my favorite mediums is chamber music. Because, I mean, when you're doing solo, there's, like, a certain level of stress on you to, you know.
Explain the differences. I'm not.
So solo is essentially, like, I'm a violinist, so I'd be playing alone or, like, with orchestra, like, as a soloist with orchestra or with piano. Chamber music is kind of, it's like small groups, so it's, for example, if you have like a piano trio, it'll be a piano, a cellist, a violinist, or if you have a string quartet, it'll be 2 violinists, a violist, a cellist, and blah, blah, blah. So usually, like, chamber music is about up to 8 people, but usually configurations of 3, 4, 5 are most common. And then orchestra is orchestra. Yeah.
That one I've heard of.
Yeah. Yeah. I play in a chamber conductorless orchestra, so it's a little different than like a full-fledged symphony orchestra, but it's, in some sense, it requires more collaboration because we have to watch each other since we don't have a conductor. But I would say definitely for me, like when I'm doing solo performing, I'm like hyper aware of like everything I'm doing because I know that like I'm the only sound that's really coming out. I mean, when I'm with piano, even when I'm with piano, I feel a lot better. I think most violinists agree.
Do a duo.
Yeah, I think that most violinists agree. No, I think most violinists agree that like playing solo is much harder than playing like with piano accompaniment. Like especially kind of like solo Bach, solo Paganini, because you're kind of alone. There's not like a rhythm basis. There's no like rhythm basis for what you're playing. But like when you're with the piano, you just feel more comfortable and you feel like there's like harmonies and like the melodies are working with each other. And you definitely get that feeling out of chamber music too, which is why it's one of my favorites. I will say if you make a mistake in chamber music, you can definitely tell because usually there's like 1 violinist or 2 violinists, so it's more of an individual thing. But I think for me, I'm not the biggest fan of orchestra just because it like...
Too many people?
Yeah, yeah. But I still do it. But yeah.
You just like outshine. There's so many people surrounded you.
No.
It's okay. I'm an attention seeker sometimes, so I love performing on my own.
As you should.
Because I also feel like every time I've had to perform on my own, I've been more nervous before, but I've always been pretty blessed in the sense that I don't get stage fright. Like, I don't have performance anxiety, and so, like, I love talking in front of people. That's why I'm doing this. But I definitely noticed that, for me, I really felt, like, a lot better afterwards when I did a solo performance. Like, the post-performance high, as you were mentioning, is just a lot higher because I'm, like, I was able to do that on my own. Many times when I did group performances, I just felt that there were so many other people that, like, it's... Even though I had an important role, like, I'm doing what I need to do, I just felt like all those other people were just, like, also there. So, I think this is just me, and I always end up being a very competitive person, so it's like when I would be in group performances, you built a really good, like, bond with all your people you're dancing with. It'd be like a family, your dance company. But I did notice that many times I would be competing with the people that I'm with. I'd be like, I want to get a better spot. I want to be in the front and center. I don't want you to be in the front and center. And it's like that thing that built up inside of me. Sometimes I would be thinking about that more than I was thinking about like my other stuff. Especially because I did it in middle school. Once I got in high school, I mean, I did salsa. I'm still doing salsa, and it's not that deep there. So I did notice that's just something that I've noticed is constantly there. That competition. I can't talk, but the competition to be front and center. Have you? I'm pretty sure since you've been competing, you definitely have had to do like auditions and like you've tried to like compete to get the first chair. That's the word, right?
Yeah, for orchestra.
Yeah. So, hey, I don't need to judge
The
me.
violas don't compete at all. We could see who could drop down the furthest.
See, but that's why viola is known to be like the bad
Yeah,
one,
facts.
right?
Nobody
Like,
likes me.
yeah, that's what I was saying.
Ouch.
Sorry for all the viola listeners. Keep listening. Anyway, so how did that feel?
I mean, I'd say for me, I don't have like a huge investment in orchestra. So I will say that like there isn't like as much pressure to get like first chair, because I have I focus a lot more on my solo stuff just because I'm so busy doing competitions and stuff like solo wise. I mean, the nice thing about orchestra is I think like wherever you're sitting, you're still kind of important. like in the sense that you have to have sound from the back if you're sitting in the back, and from the front you have to lead rhythm, and if you're in the middle you're still important, but you're in the middle. But anyway, I think the reason I say I'm not like as big of a fan of orchestra is just because like it's, you know, with orchestra there's so many sounds together, you have to kind of be really aware of like your volume, and which is not to say I love playing loud or anything, but I think it like if it's hard to hear yourself and it's hard to kind of like really know what you're doing, and so I think in that sense that's why I like that's why I prefer chamber, because there's still a level of projection that you have to do.
Yeah.
But I think just in terms of competing in general, I also don't really suffer from stage fright. It also helps that I've been doing it for so long. But like I think in terms of like performance anxiety, there's kind of a feeling that you have to perform to practice standard or more at least, because you know what you can do in practice, and so when you're nervous it can kind of go down in performance.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a level of like wanting to compete with yourself more than other people, which I know sounds like incredibly cliche, but I think especially with
That's
violin.
the whole point of this podcast.
Yeah.
So you're chilling.
But I think especially with violin, because it's such a subjective art, and it's kind of your own art in a sense. And so if you can pull off like the level of intonation you want to get, you can, you know, correct rhythms, good interpretation, and like the amount of emotion that you want to achieve, then I think that's ultimately what brings the most satisfaction out of it, rather than like first place, first chair, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm learning so much about violin. Like I knew nothing. So when I was younger, I was always mad at my parents. Like now I'm always mad at my parents. Like, why didn't you force me to play an instrument? Like, what were you doing? Every other Asian kid sitting there is like, I was forced to play this instrument, and I was like, I was never forced. Like, I'm just saying this because it's like a stereotype that we've all been forced. I was never forced. And honestly, I do get mad at my parents for it. I'm like, they tried to force me in like 4th grade to play the flute. That lasted a year. I still have the flute, but I don't play it. So if anyone wants a flute,
Should sell it.
right here. Anyway, but when you first started playing, you were 7 years old. Mm-hmm. Were you interested in it, or was it like a thing that your parents were like, come on, Grace, let's go?
I think for me, well, I started on the piano, actually, when I was 6. That was my parents. Yeah. Because, you know, like every Asian kid ever starts on the piano.
My parents never did that. I was like, what are you doing?
It's like, it's classic. And so I started on the piano. I was fine at it. I didn't love it, which is why I don't do it anymore. But I think I started violin because I wanted to, I would say. I was lucky to go to a private school for, like, when I was living in England. I grew up in England. But
she was born in Belgium.
But anyway, I think we were lucky to have kind of like...
She grew up in England.
Yeah.
Wait, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I know, you can't tell at all by my accent, but I did grow up in England. But I think I went to a private school for, like, those 10 years, and we were lucky to have like taster mornings, because I think they like tried to expose you to kind of like music, and they had like pretty high level teachers at the school, so it was convenient.
Damn.
So I think I saw the violin when I was little, and I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. And so I wanted to play the violin like when I was 7, but my parents actually didn't want me to at first, because like it's pretty well known that violin beginners sound especially bad. Like on the piano you'll always sound like fine because it's, you know, it's a piano, but on the violin I mean the beginner violinists are like something else. So my mom didn't want to deal with that kind of thing in the house, but I like no, for real, but I kind of persuaded her into it, so it was mostly
so it was the opposite. You were forcing them like, I want to play this instrument.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, Jen, were you ever forced to play any instruments?
No, I was always the one trying to convince my parents to let me play an instrument. And then I realized 4th grade that I am just not talented with instruments whatsoever. Because my brother, he played violin for... I don't know, he's the one, whatever, he did his own thing. But he was the one that was instrumentally, like, talented. And so I was like, I wanna learn the things that he did. I wanna learn piano, and, like, I'll learn the guitar. No. There's a guitar that sits in my closet.
Oh!
Yeah.
So if you want a guitar, over there. Over here. Yeah, same with my brother. My brother's, he's playing the piano right now, and he's also actually pretty good. Like, he's picked up the 2 hands, and I'm like, okay,
Solid.
stepping me. But also, like, with him, I'm kind of forcing him to do all the things that I didn't do. So it sucks to be him. Younger child, struggling. But, which, you're an only child.
I am.
So I feel like you don't have to deal with the sibling doing something and like, oh, I want to do it kind of thing. And so I feel like for you, everything that you kind of chose to do was very organic.
I would
like,
say so.
Yeah. So has that helped, like, since it wasn't, like, really pushed by anyone else, like, it was kind of, like, your own choice. Do you think that helped you stick with it longer?
I think so. I mean...
Well, it's not like you have anything to compare it to.
Yeah, exactly.
But, yeah.
I will say that, like, piano, I didn't stick with it for a reason. But, like, I think having that kind of, like, initial interest that was, like, mine in a thing just, like, really helps you stay with it even when it gets hard.
Yeah.
Like, I think generally, like, playing the violin, I mean, it gets hard sometimes, and, like, you have bad lessons, there's periods where you're not playing so well, and then, because, like, that's all part of the improvement, kind of journey that you take.
Yeah.
And I think for me, like, I've always felt like I've had to stick, like, I want to stick with it, not, like, I have an obligation to because my parents want me to. Like, there's been periods my parents have wanted me to quit, and I've just been, like, absolutely not, like, I think violin, like, it sounds kind of lame, but violin's always something I've, like, loved doing.
That's good. That's not lame.
Which is kind of also, like, why I still want to, keep pursuing it in college.
Yeah.
And I'd say there's, like, a certain benefit. I will say there's something, like, to the idea of talent that can kind of make it hard to feel like it's an organic sticking with it. Because, like, in some sense, if you're good at something and you quit, it kind of feels like a waste. You know what I mean? And so, like, I mean, for me, sometimes I've had that feeling, like, oh, like, I'm good enough at violin that it'd be kind of dumb for me to quit. But at the same time, I've always loved it enough that it's been worth it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. For me, something that my dad gets mad at me for is drawing. That, like, I don't draw enough. Because I remember that when we went into quarantine, my cousin was staying with us because he goes to college in Utah and he came from India, so obviously he didn't want to go all the way back. So he was staying with us. We were living in a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom. And there was 5 people in our house, and 3 of them were constantly in, like, meetings. Obviously, it was, like, freshman year and sophomore year, so, like, I didn't really have that much to do. Sorry to my teachers, I was not really doing much, but it's okay. It's pass or fail. Like, what do you expect me to do? Anyway, so, I remember in that time, the only thing I could do, because all of our devices were taken, and I was like, I didn't really have space, so I started drawing. And whenever I was younger, I'd always, like, get bored and I'd, like, doodle, I think everyone doodles when you're bored in class. But I know that I started to draw, and I would start to draw, like, outfits. Like, I would literally draw a girl, like, I draw a girl, and then I draw, like, a specific dress that I was, like, picturing, or I draw, like, an outfit that I thought was cute. And I'm not a fashionista. Like, I'm sorry, like, I can't, like,
I mean, the leather's giving.
Thank you. But, like, this is, like, like, you should see the things I wear before lacrosse practice. Like, that's, like, I'll mix, like, patterned blue with bright pink, and, like, it's not good. But anyway, that's not the point. And then I started moving on to, like, I've always had mental health struggles, and I was, like, I'm pretty open about it with, like, everyone but my parents. Immigrant parents. But anyway, like, I started drawing, like, I had this one drawing that I drew in my sophomore year. It's, like, a girl. It's, like, the head's, like, open, and it's just, like, all of my thoughts. So it's, like, in that moment, I literally sat there, I drew the face, and it doesn't look like me. I'm bad at that, but it looks like a girl, okay? And then it's, like, the shoulders, and then it's just, like, the head is just, like, everything I was thinking in that moment. It was, like, so it was, like, wild. Like, I wish I had a picture. Like, I think I have a picture somewhere, but I'll take a picture and show it to you guys. But it's just, like, wildness, and it was, like, every single thing, like, the anger I had and the things I was happy about. And so, like, I realized that I started using, like, something I had to apply everything I was feeling. I was, like, putting it all into my drawings. And I think that that is something that got me through quarantine. It got me through quarantine without having to, like, necessarily open up to other people about my mental health, because it's, like, I don't like talking about it very much, so I noticed that, like, that's how I applied everything I was feeling. And so like with you with your music. Like even though it was like not necessarily like very like prominent that's exactly why you're doing it. Obviously there's other reasons.
Sure, yeah.
But for me, I was just like I never felt that I was that successful that I would like go to competitions and do all that for sketching. But I knew that it was something that I was like talented enough in that I could apply my mindset to it.
Yeah.
So that's I think like for the idea of this podcast, applying talent, that was like something that I did, and I definitely think that it's very useful to have something.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So that wasn't really a question. That was just like a total anecdote. So I was trying to figure out where I was trying to go, but it was a good example. I just don't know where.
It was.
It's okay. I have a question. So, I don't know if you guys feel this way when you're like, I don't know, with your piano.
Like 1 year of like learning piano.
But like when there's like certain songs that you have like a feeling where you're like, this is a song that I have to perform. Like there's just like something there that compels you to choose it. There's something like that when you have to pick pieces?
Yeah. I mean, like, there's definitely certain pieces that I, like, really love. And, you know, I haven't gotten to play all of them, obviously, because there's a certain sequence that we still have to follow, especially when you're playing kind of pre-professionally and doing competitions and stuff. So, like, there's certain pieces that you have to play, and there's certain, like, sometimes you're not ready for a piece, or sometimes it's just not a great idea, given your current repertoire route, to go to a certain piece. But, like, there's certain pieces that, like, as I think once you get to a certain level, as you've started learning a lot of rep, you can start picking your own pieces. And, like, I think for me, there's always been a couple pieces since I was little that I've, like, fallen in love with and always wanted to play. And so, yeah. So, like, I'd say Franck Sonata is one of my favorite pieces.
I don't know why I said that.
Ever.
I don't know what that is.
It's really pretty. 100% recommend. No. And also, like, any Brahms sonatas, Brahms Sonata number 1 is my favorite. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I can play it right over there.
Yeah. And, I mean, there's one piece that I have gotten to play that I've always loved, which is Prokofiev's Second Violin Concerto. I do prefer the first, but the second is also really pretty. So, yeah. I mean, I've always joked that, like, there's certain pieces I want to play to my wedding, you know, because they're so pretty. But, I mean, it'd be nice if I get to play all of them. But I think I do sight read them sometimes for fun anyway. So it gives, it gives you a little fun, even if, like, you're playing repertoire that you're really sick and tired of sometimes. You can kind of stay refreshed. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's nice. I do not know what any of those songs are, but when this podcast comes out, I'll, like, search them up. Maybe listen to them. I actually have a classical music playlist that like I listen to when I'm working. They're so nice. They're like I started it sophomore year. So when we started this podcast, actually, I don't know what it was, but it was actually really like when we started this podcast, like right after that, I started listening to classical music when I was studying. It's not correlated at all. No, but it was like literally like when we started the podcast. So it's I don't know. Something about it just drew... Like, I knew we would do this episode, and I knew I could use an anecdote, so
Yeah.
Yeah. But, anyway, is there anything final you want to say about how your music has benefited your life?
I mean, I think just, like, music has really helped me, like, stay mentally sane. It's like it's giving dramatic, but I think it's like to an extent it's true, and I think I kind of want to like point out that you don't have to really be like really talented at something to use it as like an emotional outlet, because I think art in general is just so helpful as like something you can really express yourself in, and I mean it doesn't have to be like pretty art. I mean, I guess if you're playing an instrument, you maybe don't want to sound like crap because it'll like, hurt your ears.
What if they like it?
But like I think even so, like you can express yourself in that medium, even like if you don't feel like necessarily like you're good enough for like, you know, competitions or whatever, because you know, like you don't do it to be elite at it, you do it just to feel good and feel better. And I think to an extent, like even though I've done all this stuff with violin, I think it's always nice to kind of return to like my roots and kind of think about like why I fell in love with it in the first place.
Yeah. Wow. That wraps up our little segment with, well, not that little, but our segment with Grace. Feel free to enjoy some behind-the-scenes clips as we transition to our conversation about talents with a mental health professional.
Hey guys, welcome back to the #1 podcast in the.
Yo, holy
Cases.
he dead!
Okay, let me start over. It was at Wakanda Forever.
Drink water. Do you need water?
No, I'm good. I don't need water.
Are you sure?
I have the immune system of twice the man. Andrew, how was your Northwestern interview?
Yeah.
Didn't go well.
So it was at 4 on Friday, right? It was at 4 p.m. And so
Oh,
I was, like,
no.
in the waiting room, I was like ready. Everything's like perfect. I'm
Wait,
like so
waiting
ready.
room,
I'm like a little
wait.
nervous. I'm ready. And then at 3:59, the power on my whole street goes out. So my Iris is in the waiting room. Do I let her in? Do you guys have the doc
Yeah.
pulled up?
Nope.
Oh, I thought we were just doing freestyle today. I want to give the commencement speech. Ashita, would you vote for me?
No.
Why?
Yeah, probably not. I'm gonna be honest.
Why? Why? Why do you think I would give a good commencement speech? I think I would.
What?
Why do you think I'd give a good one?
Because I think you're gonna say something stupid.
Oh, did I tell you guys my senior quote? I look better with your mom. I look better with you are mom. Your mom. I'm leaving with your mom. The photos I'm in with your mom when I'm having sex with her or I'm dating her look better.
We
than
know
Ashley
what you're
Goodwood
trying
photos.
to say.
No,
It's
yeah,
just
I know, but why is that
stupid.
funny is what I'm asking.
They're sexual though. They're funny. How about this one? Who let the DAWGs out? Who let the dogs out? How about
Wait,
it's the
that's
dog
a good.
eat dog world? Or I could do this one. Made in India, exported to America. I'm an American. I just love America. I just love it.
Can you change your background, bro? Are you really gonna be in the Matrix the whole episode?
Oh, sure. I'll change mine. Don't worry.
No,
I knew it.
I
I
knew this was
knew
gonna
it.
happen. Stop.
I knew it. Stop it.
Yes, I am mostly joking.
Oh my god.
Okay.
Arjun, is your Wi-Fi gonna glitch out?
Is it crazy that
Problem?
I've never had a Wi-Fi problem in the last like 2 episodes? It's crazy.
That is crazy.
Oh my gosh, she's frozen, bro.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Okay, no, we're good. We're good.
She's unfrozen. Okay.
Me? No, I'm not.
No,
I'm not- we're
no
not
one is
talking about
talking
you.
Guys, don't doubt me.
I'm doubting you.
What the fuck?
My bad.
I want to negotiate.
There's a certain Counter-Strike major finals at 10 a.m.
10 a.m? When's it gonna finish?
Well, you see, if I stay at 2, I can watch all 3 maps for sure. If it's at 2, I can watch all 3 maps for sure. If it's at 1, I'm gonna miss part of the 3rd map. Now, if there's a 4th map and 5th map, I'm missing that.
Hey guys, welcome back to the second part of our Laugh Out Together show episode on coping mechanisms. I hope you enjoyed some behind the scenes clips. And now we're joined with Mrs. Thao, who is a marriage and family therapist and the owner of Inside Out Therapy, where she uses a lot of her research and past experiences to help her clients nurture change. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for the kind intro. Yes, my name is Chau, and some clients also know me as Judy. I am the owner of Inside Out Therapy based in Southern California. Right now, my practice is completely virtual, so I have the honor of meeting with clients all throughout California, actually. So it's such a pleasure to be here with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Of course. That is really cool that you're virtual, because I feel like that's really useful, especially since people are still like iffy about going back in person.
So, yes, especially during this time with like the pandemic still going on. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we want to get started by talking about different coping mechanisms that people use. In the last part of this episode, we talked to Grace, who is a violinist, and she's played violin for a long time, but she started using violin as a coping mechanism over time
because that's just how it was built into. So over the years of you working with different clients, how have you noticed people using different passions and hobbies to cope with whatever they're dealing with?
Yeah. So a person, when it comes to hobbies, it serves as like a buffer for stress, right? So in our day to day, we are exposed to some stress, like either mild stress or severe stress. And usually when we have hobbies, it really helps us to cope with life stressors. So there are so many coping mechanisms. And I think what is important to recognize is that how does that activity make us feel, right? Because it could differ from people to people. And one that works for you may not work for your friend, right? So I think the whole key is to be able to just try on different things and see if you like it or not. But two things. So when we are faced with a stressful problem, we can either choose to focus on dealing with it in like a problem solving way, so that we can resolve that issue, or we can focus on like dealing with it more in like an emotional focused way. So for example, maybe you guys can give me an example of like a stressful thing that's happening right now, being in high school.
I mean, I can go. I'm a senior, and so a constant stress is like where I'm going to go to college, if I'm going to go to college, and like because basically college apps were just a summation of everything you've done and worked hard for in high school, and so now it's like seeing, oh, are we like, did everything I do, is it like actually going to result in something?
Yes, I hear you. And that time is very stressful for a lot of people, right? When we're faced with so many uncertainties of like, okay, where are we going to go? Are we going to like stay close, or are we going to go to like there are different types of colleges, right? Like university, like Cal State, or even community colleges, and just kind of weighing out our options. There's just so many different options that we can feel very overwhelmed by it. Right. So in dealing with this problem, so there's two ways, right? So we can either choose to be kind of like focused on the problem and problem solve and see what we can do about the situation. So what that means is we can kind of write things out, like see what our options are, right? So I'm sure that each and every one of you have different options when it comes to college and like the pros and cons of why you would like to go to that college, right? So that would be using like a problem focused method to address the problem, and like just sitting yourself down and writing about like pros and cons of each option that you have considered. And in just seeing those pros and cons in front of you, it can help to reduce that level of stress because you recognize that you have problems. I mean, I'm sorry, you have options. You have options, and that it's not like you only have one choice. There are like different things that you can consider, and from that you can make a decision that is best for you in that moment. So that's how you would focus on resolving that problem in that type of focus. The other option is called like emotion focused solution. So what that means is that like usually when we're faced with stress and uncertainty, we can feel overwhelmed, like I said before, right? So this technique, it comes with like you kind of recognizing that like, okay, like there's an overwhelming sensation in your body, right? Something doesn't feel good, right? So this is more like you being attuned to your feelings, knowing that like it's not like you're not feeling like your usual self, where like you're socializing, like you're doing all of that fun stuff to keep your life more balanced, right? So if you're feeling that your stress level is very high and like you're not sleeping well, you're not eating too good, you're kind of like not hanging out with friends, then we may want to opt for the option of kind of trying those techniques with like being more emotion focused. And what we can do is ask ourselves, what can we do for ourselves right now in order to self-soothe? So this could mean like a lot of different things, right? It could mean maybe engaging in a hobby and a coping like mechanism that we love to do, right? It could mean reaching out to social support, surrounding ourselves with just good company and energy. That could be helpful as well. Or sometimes we may just need to attend to our like just basic needs, right? Like eating better, sleeping better, and that could really help too to shift our like stress level a little bit more. Yeah, so I hope that helps. So let me know if I need to clarify between like the emotion focus versus like problem focused techniques.
No, I think that's very like another way to look at it, Jen.
Yeah, and another thing to add too with the emotion focused technique is another thing that is always in our control is our perception of the situation, right? So, for example, we can be faced with similar situations, but it's really dependent on how we view the situation that affects whether or not we feel stressed out about it, right? So, for example, if stress, right? The idea of stress, like a lot of people think of stress as a bad thing. Like, okay, I'm stressed right now. This is bad. Like things are going to hit the fan, right? So if we have that perception of stress, we are going to feel a little bit more stressed out and more like overwhelmed, right? But if we view it in a more balanced way, that hey, like stress is somewhat normal. Like everyone in this world experience stress to some extent, right? But it's about like how we like manage the stress. And we can also think about, okay, when are times that stress could be a good thing? And one that comes to my mind is let's say when we're in school, right? We have like tests and like quizzes that comes up. So a person who is experiencing some level of stress, that little stress is going to lead them to actually study and prepare for the exam, right? Rather than like not studying at all. And then you would be even more stressed out when you're faced with the exam. So sometimes stress can help us to kind of like try our best, to prepare, to plan for it so that we can feel good about it when it happens.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like a certain degree of stress can definitely be helpful. But in terms of like passions and like hobbies, do you think that overbooking yourself with like a certain subject or topic could become toxic or harmful?
It's like in that sense with the because a lot of people take up passions in order to release the emotions they're feeling, but I think sometimes if you keep doing it, it becomes like a large part of your life, and then you constantly want to partake in it, and you start competing in it and making it a huge thing. And so can that become a little harmful to you, or is that just like a part of life that people have to manage?
Yeah, great questions. So when it comes to you like engaging in a hobby, what's very important is kind of creating a balance that works for you, right? So these passion that you have, like it's all about, yeah, like seeing like what are your priorities like in life, right? And kind of just creating a really good balance for it. So for example, a lot of people like they kind of juggle between these priorities, and I'm just going to give this example. Okay, so maybe main priorities for some people is family, right? Self-care, work or school, right? And then maybe their health and like social support, right? So they kind of fluctuate. Those are like their main priorities, or for a lot of people, right? Or may I ask, actually, what's one of what would you say is your priorities in life? Like a few like set of things that you guys kind of like to balance on.
Well, I think family is definitely a part of it, and friends, but also music's a really big part of my life. So I've like kind of like taken on a lot in that category. So that's also definitely in the top.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Okay, so you said family, friends, music, and then let's just add in like your just health, your health and your well-being, right? Let's say, and is there anything else that you would like to add aside from those four things? So it sounds like family, friends, your passion, and then your health, like your health and your self-care, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if those are your priorities in life, like sometimes people get really stressed and overwhelmed when they try to do stuff for all their priorities in one day, right? So when I say creating a balance that works for you, that means kind of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture and how we are intentionally planning to like invest in our priorities in the long run, right? So it may not look like you can address all those things every single day because you might burn out. There's just like a lot, like we only have so many hours in one day, right? And then if we're constantly just like trying to check off these boxes for every day, it can feel like you're just kind of stuck on that hamster race, like trying to like check off everything, but you're not really being present and intentional in what you're doing, right? So my recommendation is actually trying to focus on more quality over quantity. And every day, these things can change, right? So let's say, for example, like for you guys being students, you have school already 5 days a week, right? Monday through Friday. And that is also another priority that I did not add in your list, right? Just like maintaining school, right? So that makes 5. So now if every day school already checks off one of like the big priority because you have to attend, and it's like 8 hours of schooling every day, kind of leave room for 2 other things maybe. So instead of trying to just check off these boxes and check off like all 5 or 6 of these boxes every day, I want you to really kind of just focus on checking off maybe 2 or 3, but doing it well. And every day these things can change. So let's say today, or today is a Saturday. So knowing that you've already did school or have to choose school like Monday through Friday, then on the Saturday, we would be more intentional in doing other stuff, like the other like 3 priorities that's on your list, right? So maybe, but you guys are doing this right now, and I'm sure that this is also part of like school related thing, right? So I would recommend that like maybe we check off 2 other things that brings us joy instead of just like, school or playing school or trying to check off everything like in your weekends, because that could feel very overwhelming.
Yeah, I think something you bring up a good point because a lot of the times we're really busy. Like Jen, for example, she's doing her school musical, and so every day. What time do you come home, Jen?
Like 10:30. Yeah.
And then on the weekends, you also have rehearsal. So I think so like right now she's super busy but she's pursuing something she's passionate in.
Yes.
Similarly, I play lacrosse, and so obviously it doesn't take up as much time as a musical does, but it does take up a significant amount of time of mine, but it's something I'm passionate in, and it's definitely something that's helped me cope. We did an episode earlier where we talked about sports and mental health, because I think that's a pretty complex topic in and of itself. Yeah. But I think coping mechanisms are very important, as I've dealt with a lot of different mental health like illnesses and things of those sort. I've had to find my own coping mechanisms. And I think I think we were very specific in this episode when we were talking about coping mechanisms as specific to hobbies. But I think there's, as you were mentioning, there's like the problem focus, and then there's the emotional focus. And I think it just depends also on the different events that you're going through. I'm not sure if you've been approached with this kind of issue, but for example, a lot of people have test anxiety when they are faced in any kind of pressure situation. They struggle with managing, and sometimes in high school especially, that comes off as, no, you just don't know your material, otherwise you wouldn't be struggling. So I think in those cases people also need to have their own coping mechanisms. And so sorry, I don't know if you heard that, but that was my thought. So in those kind of cases, what do you suggest? Like specific, like figuring out how to find a coping mechanism for the specific things you're doing.
I see. So when it comes to
I guess
testing anxiety, or
like that was just an example I brought up, but I feel like every single person, as you mentioned, that there's the emotional focus you can use, and then there's the problem focus. But I feel like there's such a variety of things you can deal with. So, what specifically do you suggest someone do? Like, how do you suggest they approach the problem they're faced with? Like, if someone is struggling with test anxiety, how do they approach, first of all, accepting that the reason they struggle with tests is that reason, and then how do you suggest they move forward from there? Especially if it's like not people don't support or understand what they're feeling.
Yeah. So where I would start is actually just trying both, right? Ask yourself, is there anything that I can do right now that could help me to like resolve this issue, right? So more of like the problem focused technique. So let's just say, for example, for the testing anxiety, right? So if you know that you're having a big test that's coming up and it's making you feel like a little bit anxious, right? So what we can do is ask yourself like what can we do about it, right? So what actions can we take? And that could mean like maybe planning ahead, like scheduling time into our calendar to make sure that we are studying, right? And I think that could help because usually when it comes to anxiety, like anxiety increases when we don't do anything about it, right? So I think any action, small or big, can really help to like reduce that sense of anxiety. So that's the first thing, like asking yourself, what can you do about it, and actually doing it. And then the second one is the emotion focus, where like, okay, what can I give to my body right now that could help with the situation, right? So it doesn't have to mean like being focused on like that issue at hand, but giving your body what it needs, like maybe the adequate sleep that it needs, like because sometimes like when we're losing a lot of sleep, it's hard for us to be productive the next day, right? So resting is also very powerful too, like just giving ourselves that time and opportunity to rest. And perception kind of plays in it too, because viewing the situation as like, okay, I need to give myself the adequate sleep so that I can really show up for myself the next day and really like try my best in like getting a good study session in, right? But I know that with a lot of students, sometimes what they struggle with is the perception part, where they're like, I don't have time to sleep right now, right? Like the test is in like a few days, like I cannot sleep. So give yourself permission to rest, especially when you're feeling like very, very stressed out. You cannot be as productive as after when you have like recharge, you know.
Yeah. I just blinked on what I was going to say. So sorry.
It's okay. Take your time.
I think, okay, yes. I think sleep is definitely a big part in being productive, and I'm definitely lacking a little bit of it right now. But in terms of like sleeping and like stress, do you think that could tie in with like stage anxiety and like performance, like how you can perform not only on the stage but also like anywhere else in life?
Yeah. So definitely like performance anxiety is something that is quite common, especially within teenagers. Like there's so many things that's going on like in those years. Like, and a lot of times like we are involved in so many different extracurriculars, right? And just trying to balance and really like show up for ourselves. It's challenging to like find and create that balance, right? That works for us. So if we are experiencing like stage anxiety, we can definitely do some like grounding activities before those events, right? And the key here is being consistent about it and actually practicing it so that it can become a habit, right? So with those like with those big things like a performance or um, presenting, doing a presentation, like it makes a lot of people anxious, and that's not something that is uncommon at all, right? So if we are feeling that sense of anxiety before we do that, how we can take care of ourselves better is next time let's try something different, right? Let's try to like do a few grounding activities before we have those performances and see if that can help. See if we notice like any differences in like the way that we show up for ourselves and just being able to like do our best, because that's enough, like you cannot do more than your best.
Yeah, I think also like perception is really an important thing in this sense, because it's like sometimes before you go on a stage and you do something, you're just like, you feel like, oh my God, so many people are watching. And it's just like, or in life, you're like, this is such a big event. But sometimes you just look at it in a different perception and be like, maybe it's like not that bad. Like, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
My favorite thing to do before I like get on stage is if anyone ever watched Dance Moms, they've seen the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I love doing that anytime before I go on a stage. And I think that's like very similar to the conversations we had in the last segment of this episode, about like Grace and like her violin and just performing all the time. And I think that there's so many obstacles present with pursuing a passion, and but I think that there's so many benefits. Like, I feel like if you have a passion or a hobby as a coping mechanism, like that's your coping mechanism, then I think, like, for example, the community that you get built, I think you can back me up on this in the sense that having a strong sense of community, especially with people that are interested in the same things, is very beneficial. And additionally, I think being able to intertwine your emotions into the thing you're pursuing. For example, if you draw, then like drawing out your emotions, that truly benefits. So I think what I want to ask in this sense is, what are all the benefits you've seen in pursuing like a passion as a coping mechanism?
Yeah. So when we engage in an activity that brings us joy, like chemically in our brain, it increases the happy hormone, right? Dopamine gets released. And then it also reduces the stress hormone, which is cortisol. So like that's already something, right? That like when we're like engaging in something that makes us like happy, like it's benefiting us like physically, right? So with that, like I think it's just knowing that, like knowing and being able to give ourselves permission to do those things. Because in life, sometimes like we may feel like we don't have a lot of time, right? But the truth is we do have 168 hours every week. And if anything, we do deserve a little bit of time for ourselves and just focusing on our happiness and being able to play and to find joy, right? I think that is so important.
Oh, definitely. I think joy is a very wonderful thing. I don't know if you guys have watched Inside Out. I don't know. That's the first thing I thought of when you said joy. I was just like, without her, things weren't working. And so
that's a great one. I love that Disney movie.
Yeah, I think it's like very accurate in certain ways.
Yeah.
And so I think everyone handles things differently. But I wanted to say, as we started off our conversation, we talked about how you virtually give like your services virtually. That brought up a good thing about the pandemic. And it was a big thing that we went through. And it's still part of conversation always. And so with the sorry, 1 second. Jen, do you want to ask the question about how the pandemic increased coping mechanisms?
With the pandemic, there was definitely some people that got their passions or hobbies cut off because of the lack of interaction that was being able to happen. Would that inability to participate in a certain activity harm them?
Yeah, and during that time, it was a hard time for a lot of people. We were experiencing a crisis in the world. right? Where like everything kind of shut down. And yeah, it really wasn't easy. And you said during that time, like it was kind of hard for us to have that like social support, right? And continue with our like extracurriculars and all that. And so my question is like, was it like, can you give me an example actually of like something that was maybe hard for you guys, and I can like give more like feedback on like, you know, how like what we can try, like options that we can try.
I think for me, it was more of like my support system because a lot of it was my friends, and that just wasn't there. But also participating in an actual choir environment was also non-existing. So,
yeah, yeah. So during that time, it was just really, really challenging. Like we may feel more lonely, right? Because all of a sudden, like this thing happened where we are forced to stay at home, you know. And then so I think during those moments what's important is kind of like seeing what our options are and seeing how do we still get that sense of connection without actually having to be in person. And I think yeah, during that time like a lot of people actually got really creative with it, you know, in like how they like reach out to like friends and family and like stuff that, and just keep up with things that they love to do, right? But I think the whole key is to like initiate, to like get these connections, like some sort of yeah, get staying connected at some level is better than nothing, right? So did you guys feel like you were able to like, you know, reach out to some friends like through like FaceTime and all that stuff? Because that's the beauty of technology. That's like one great thing about technology, right? Where like we actually can connect like this instead of like having to be in person. But I do hear you that it is different, right? Like that like face to face interaction is a little bit different than online.
Yeah, definitely. I think we all went through a little bit of lack of people during that time, but
Yeah.
I think we were able to manage, and now we're doing great for the most part. So I do want to ask, is there any final pieces of amazing advice you would like to give to the audience?
Yes, and it's something I think I missed that maybe you guys did ask already. But so when it comes to like coping mechanism, we want to make sure that the activity that we're engaging in is healthy, right? It's like a healthy activity. And the three things that you can ask yourself is like, if this activity, like, you know, when you're engaging in it, are you hurting yourself in any way? Are you hurting other people, or are you like destroying property? Because if it falls in any of those categories, then it's not healthy, right? Then we can like kind of explore like other options that can um, bring us like more joy, that could be healthier for our mind and body and spirit. So that's something that I want to add. And then another thing is um, when it comes to coping strategies too, there's two types, like another two types where like it's either active or avoidant, right? So active coping strategies requires that we're like intentional and like planning and doing something about it. So that's a healthy way of addressing the problem, right? But sometimes I see this happening, and I think it ties in with what you asked earlier with the overbooking, right? Sometimes when people overbook themselves, it could be because they are trying to avoid something, right? Something that's going on that they do not have the capacity to address. But maybe that thing is important, right? So we could take like a step back and maybe like take a break and then recharge and ask ourselves, like, instead of and this is a technique called mindfulness, where like instead of being judgmental towards ourselves and like, you know, kind of thinking like why am I doing this? Like, I'm not strong enough to address the problem, or like I keep running away. Or instead of judging ourselves for what we're doing, like take a more serious standpoint. Like, I'm wondering why I'm doing this. I'm wondering why I'm not addressing that problem, right? I'm wondering what it will take for me to do it. And asking yourself, what are the barriers in the way of actually addressing that? Because sometimes, like, especially during our teenage years, there's just a lot going on socially too, right? And then let's say, for example, if we have like a social situation that happened with our friends, like let's say like some like drama, right? It's kind of hard, and we may not have the capacity for that, and like wanting to address it, so we constantly avoid the situation and like talking to our friend about it. But usually, the more that we avoid something, it actually maintains the stress of it. So knowing that, yeah, like you can ask yourself, okay, if I really value this friendship, what am I going to do about this situation? Right? Because we have to talk about it somehow, and a lot of times I see kind of like friendships, like disconnection happening in friendships because the problem wasn't talked about. It's just like a lack of communication, where like maybe like the situation that happened was something like very trivial, but like the two people like miscommunicated about it and they misinterpreted the situation, and then no one addressed it. So then they just kind of fizzle out and sweep things under the rug, and then they're not friends anymore, which is such a waste of a great friendship, right? So I would really like encourage you guys to like, let's say if we have like any issues with our friends or any like social situations that happen that is causing us some form of stress, give ourselves time, most importantly, to just like take a little break from it. But we don't have to do it in like in an abrupt way where like you don't talk to the person and then like you just take this time, but like they don't know that you're taking the time, right? So instead of that, try this. Like let them know that like, hey, like I'm still kind of upset about what happened between us. I need some time right now for me to just like process through it, but I really want us to talk about it maybe in 2 weeks, and kind of just throw a deadline out there, right? So that you can kind of revisit that and check in again. Because like if you were friends for a while, there's something there, there's like value in that. And we want to make sure that we're not throwing away relationships just because we are avoidant of like addressing the problem, and when we avoid it, we maintain the stress, and it's going to still be in the back of our mind somehow. So that's another thing that I wanted to share that I feel like happens a lot within this age group.
Yeah.
And it's not uncommon. Yeah.
I mean, it's so funny because like that was like life-changing advice in the sense that like I'm definitely one to like forget about it or like suppress it, but then like I constantly think about it. And that was advice I didn't know I needed. So I'm glad that you decided to share that. But with that being said, thank you so much for this conversation. I know I got a lot of it and Jen got a lot out of it. So I'm guessing that our audience did too. And as for everyone else, thank you for watching this episode and tune in next month for another episode on the Laugh Out Together show.
It was such an honor to join you guys today. Thank you so much again for having me.
So we did a bit of trolling and scheduled 2 guests on accident. So here's the portion with the second guest. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our episode on coping mechanisms. I hope you enjoyed our last segment. Now I am without Jen, but we are honored to be with another guest, Dr. Ross. Dr. Ross is a psychologist that focuses on psychotherapy and helps all of his patients and clients foster and understand their feelings. And we are so glad to have you with us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Of course.
So, just so you know, I work with individuals and couples, and so that's what I specialize in.
Yeah. So, Dr. Ross, feel free to give us a little rundown on why you chose to be in the field you are in, and how you like your job.
Yeah, well, I think like a lot of people who are in the field, I've always been interested in supporting people through really difficult struggles, but it's really difficult to figure out ways to help people who can struggle in a myriad of different ways with complex emotional difficulties as someone who's not trained as a psychologist. So it was really enticing to me. And I think it's a role that I sort of took on in some ways from early life, of really caring about my friends and talking to my friends about what was going on with them. So it was, one of the things I wanted to be from maybe second grade. And I also had a lot of exposure to psychology and psychotherapy from early on in my life as well.
Wow, that's really cool. I think a lot of us weren't like very weren't exposed to therapy and psychotherapy from a younger age. And I think it's really cool, especially for me, to learn about all of that.
Yeah. It's not very common. So I'm glad that we're able to talk about it here together today.
Yeah. So
I think it's really important.
I'd like to start off by asking you, since this whole episode is kind of about coping mechanisms and how people choose to cope with the struggles they face in life. The first segment we did for this episode was with Grace, who is a musician, and she plays the violin, and she used music to cope with her mental struggles. She started off playing music, and then it became a coping mechanism. It didn't start off that way. But I think that's one form of coping mechanisms, and there's definitely like some not as great coping mechanisms. So over the span of years you've been working, how have you noticed people, like what kind of coping mechanisms have you seen, and how have you seen the effects of them?
Yeah, there's so many different coping mechanisms that people can use to bring comfort to uncomfortable feelings, stress or emotional pain. And it's really deeply subjective. It's about what gives you a good feeling when you're doing it, what gives you a feeling of relief, what helps to alleviate some of those feelings of stress that you might be feeling. And I think that everybody has different ways of engaging with that. And of course, like anything, too much of something, it's possible it could be problematic. It just depends. And I think it's important that everybody has coping mechanisms. And I think it's also important that people, I think that the biggest coping mechanism that we all have is each other. It's important to be able to lean on other people. And I think relationships are a key component to coping mechanisms, although coping mechanisms can be really internal. If somebody has anger management, they could count to 10, for example. That would be something that's happening inside of their own mind and not involving other people necessarily immediately. But there's so many: music, arts, listening to music or viewing art, mindfulness, meditation, cooking, singing in the car like I did on my way to work this morning, exercising.
Me too.
Yeah. And you just had lacrosse practice, so you got some exercise in too. I think it's really important that we have these things ongoing in our life. It's a part of the rhythm of life to have strong coping mechanisms.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've noticed that a lot of people have different coping mechanisms as well, but I've noticed that, as you mentioned, like it can vary based on what you're struggling with. For example, if you have anger issues, then counting to 10. So how do you suggest someone approach finding a coping mechanism? And how do you suggest someone first accept that there even is a problem that they have to cope with?
Yeah. Well, I would start off by saying that it's important, if you can, to have coping mechanisms prior to there being a problem. Problem, I mean, we're using that term kind of loosely, but, everybody goes through ups and downs in life, and there can be emotional problems that people bump into. And it's helpful for people to have things already sort of installed as a part of their daily life and routine. Because these things, when people are really going through it, for example, they might not feel quite like themselves. And it's important to have things that they can lean on that are part of their identity and core to them. that feel right to them, that give them a good feeling, and that can reliably give them a good feeling. Like, I know if I call this one friend or this one family member, it's going to feel good. It's going to remind me of better times. Or if I listen to this one song, it's going to remind me of a time that wasn't quite so stressful, and I have some good feelings, for example. And in terms of finding a coping mechanism, I think that was the first part of the question, right?
Yeah.
I think it's deeply subjective. It's about the feeling you get when doing things. So I think it's important that if you're looking for a coping mechanism, see what you gravitate towards and what you notice other people doing that's exciting to you or enticing to you that you want to give a shot. And do you get a good feeling when you're doing it? I would say that relationships are universal. We're relational people. We're relational beings, rather. We're all people. And I think exercise is a pretty ubiquitous sort of coping mechanism. To whatever extent someone's able to get some exercise in, that's important. And when people are really down in the dumps and not feeling well emotionally, it can be tough to get the motivation going to get into one of these coping mechanisms. So to have stuff already going for them, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I know that, like, especially on my team, there's definitely a lot of people that find exercise as the way of coping. I think sometimes I do too. But something that I realized when you were talking was that the definition or the thing that I believe is a coping mechanism is not really the way you were approaching it, which I want to fix from in my perspective, because you were mentioning that it's something that's enticing to you. It's something that makes you feel good. In my head, a coping mechanism is just something that you use to manage a problem. So in my head, it's after you get the problem. So could you define what a coping mechanism is and because I want to fix it in my head.
Yeah. Well, I think I would use a similar definition to how I started off, like really vague, because I think it is really vague, that anything that makes something uncomfortable inside feel more comfortable, anything that helps to alleviate distress, anxiety, difficult emotional experiences, I think is a coping mechanism. And also, I think that whether or not someone's really going through it, like I said earlier, or just dealing with the ups and downs of stress with school, there's always stuff going on that could benefit from some coping mechanisms. And they're really varied. But for example, being a high school student, there's a lot of tests to prepare for, midterms to prepare for, papers to write, projects to do, and extracurriculars and there's a competitive nature to high school too. So there can be a lot of pressure. And so I would say, as one's navigating the pressures of high school or school, that's a good example of that's a good time to be experimenting with what feels right, what helps to alleviate some of the tension. It doesn't have to be something severe or even moderate. It can be little subtle feelings that are challenging that we want to work with. We want to respond to in some kind of way to make ourselves feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, I guess that makes a little bit more sense in my head. And I really like that. Like, I think that phrase, like making something uncomfortable feel more comfortable, is a wonderful way to put it. And I think I kind of want to like circle back to the original segment that we had on music and using different passions of yours as a coping mechanism. And like you said, it was something that was ingrained in Grace. She had been playing music since she was very young. And then because that just felt good, it transformed into her coping mechanism. But what happens when that coping mechanism is the thing that starts providing you with stress? For example, a lot of people, as you mentioned, extracurriculars, a lot of things that we do, for example, Grace's music, it was something that she kept doing, but as she got older, it became more and more, I guess, more competitive, and she started playing at higher levels. And that leads to competition with other people and a constant stress or pressure on you. So how do you help, like, what do you recommend for someone whose coping mechanism turns into like something that's causing them stress, and if they really want to regain that specific thing as a coping mechanism, like how do you suggest to deal with that?
first of all, is Grace a violinist? I might know her.
Yeah.
I'm a musician as well. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. I
really
think, I think that that's a really good question. And I think that we can get a lot of relief from engaging with something that we're deeply passionate about, like Grace is passionate about with music. But I think it's also important to remember that when we're called to do it on a high level, it can add a layer of tension. If we're doing music and something else and a bunch of extracurriculars, trying to excel in school, for example, it can add a layer of pressure. So for example, I'm sure Grace went to school for music too. And I actually, before I became a psychologist, I did my undergraduate degree in double bass performance in classical music. And, there's a lot of pressure on doing jury performances and recitals and master classes. And so there's a lot of tension to cope with through that process. And it's unless you find a way of coping with it that really works for you, it can be a lot of pressure and it can feel uncomfortable, and you want to find some kind of way to make it feel comfortable. And my recommendation for using that passion to still feel engaged and in love with that sort of passion that they're pursuing, I would say, is to find a way to make it fun and playful again. So sometimes when I'm playing the bass and I'm trying to use it to relax, and I'm trying not to be critical of myself, am I playing this just spot on exactly how Beethoven needed it to be played? I might just start to improvise or have fun and be playful and spontaneous in the moment. Right? The difference between playing lacrosse, competitively on the field, or messing around with friends playing lacrosse and telling jokes and having fun. So I think that's a big part of it. Also, some of these things that we get really passionate about can be kind of solitary, right? Musicians are in the practice room for hours and hours, a lot of times. And I think it's important to come together with people to talk about the experience. I think that's an important coping mechanism. And then just to have lots of coping mechanisms. I think we're both big advocates
Not
of
be
that.
reliant on one.
Yeah, things to draw from.
That actually is a really good transition into the other thing I was thinking about. And it's the community you build through a passion or your coping mechanism. For example, I think the very stereotypical, I think in a movie, when you think of a widow, you think of the stereotypical coping mechanism that they're given. It's knitting. But it's really funny. But I think that in movies, if they're a widow and they're coping with their husband's death, they're always knitting, which is a weird example. But I feel in those movies, they show how the woman that's knitting starts knitting with a bunch of other women, and then they have a community in which they have people to rely on, and they build deep bonds. I guess that example with me, and I've played lacrosse many years and on club teams, school teams. And so I feel like the community I built there also helped me through a lot of my problems. I think a lot of my closest friends are from lacrosse. And I think that's something the community built is very beneficial. So as you've probably seen a lot of clients with different coping mechanisms, how have you seen the communities they've built support them through the problems they've been struggling with?
I think that's a huge factor. I think especially, in the aftermath of what's happened the past few years since the height of the pandemic and coronavirus, and how isolated people have been, particularly for that big chunk of time in 2020, I think people were really suffering profoundly with loneliness. I think it was really difficult for people, and it really disturbed the usual rhythm of life. And a part of the usual rhythm of life is being with people and giving people high fives or hugging your friend or however you like to communicate with people. And that really was quite limited. And so I would agree with you that there's something really fun about being together with a group, and I would encourage it. I would encourage it a lot. I think there's something really cool about being a part of something bigger than yourself. If you're a musician, then playing an orchestra or a band or an ensemble is really fun. If you're playing lacrosse, you don't want to play lacrosse by yourself. You want somebody to volley with, and maybe there's tackling. I'm not sure. I think
no. I think there is in boys lacrosse, not as much in girls.
Okay, that's good. Good.
But
the boys shouldn't be tackling.
The boys across, it's such a violent sport, but it's okay. It's fun to watch.
Well, so I agree with you. I think that the team element is really important. It adds a feeling of community and a feeling of being a part of something bigger than oneself. And I think that's really special as a person.
Yeah, and another thing you mentioned was COVID, and I know that personally, I picked up a lot of things over the COVID years. Like I started to paint, which I think you can see in the background, like things up there. Those were the first paintings I've ever painted. Like I ever actually painted.
Awesome.
And those are like over COVID, and it's just like I realized that whenever I was like kind of, because I was kind of like my parents were like in their meetings and like busy, and so I was just kind of like, how am I supposed to spend my time? Like I'm alone, and so I like paint or draw out my feelings. Yeah. And so I think like that's a coping mechanism I picked up. So I know that if I did, there's probably a lot of people. So over the past couple of years, how have you seen the has there been an uprise in coping mechanisms, and specifically like people taking up hobbies the past couple of years?
Yeah, I would say there definitely has been a big uptick in people taking up hobbies, and people figuring out ways to connect with people remotely. That's increased tremendously since the pandemic. Though you hear a little bit less about it now. It seems like people are getting together a little bit. Follow your CDC, the guidelines, people. But anyways, I think people are getting together a lot more in person. But I would say there's been a huge uptick in people using different coping mechanisms and connecting with people virtually with different coping mechanisms, because you have to find a way to pass the time. And I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of people turn to a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms, like different substances during the pandemic as well. I would say that there's been a big uptick in a need for psychotherapy. Because I think, psychotherapy is a really important, useful process for people to engage with when their coping mechanisms aren't working for them, or they're not working quite well enough. And also, coping mechanisms are about, like we said, working with discomfort. And if somebody wants to get to the bottom of what that discomfort is, that's where I come in. That's what part of what my field is about.
Yeah, that's actually, so sorry. I totally just tripped over all my words.
Okay. I think I've done that too today.
But in the sense of coping mechanisms, a lot of the times we choose specific things. And as we've mentioned over the course of this episode, different people choose different coping mechanisms, and different people have different struggles. And so since you specialize in psychotherapy, which has a lot to do with understanding why people do what they do, what like their thinking is behind it, basically what their psychology is. And obviously I'm not asking you to psychoanalyze anyone, but I just wanted to know, how do you approach the different actions people do? Like basically, what is psychotherapy and how is it used in these cases? Figure out what's happening.
Yeah. Well, so psychotherapy is a process that people can engage with someone like me, a psychotherapist. Mm-hmm. They can be a psychologist or a marriage and family therapist or a licensed clinical social worker. Some psychiatrists offer psychotherapy. And it's a process that you engage with where you're trying to explore what's going on in your mind and getting to build meaning around what's going on in your life, why you live your life the way that you do, your strengths, your weaknesses, and basically understanding yourself on a deeper level and engaging in that process with someone who's taking a very caring and unbiased position with you, where they're there along to support you through your discovery of why you do the things that you do, what makes you tick. And that can be about really difficult emotional pain that someone's going through, or it can be about self-discovery. It can be about a lot of different things. I know that's kind of a vague description of what psychotherapy is.
No, but I'm glad I received it. I'm personally, I think
It's also something that's deeply subjective, just like these coping mechanisms are. So psychotherapy looks different for different people who come in. For example, we usually I don't use a cookie cutter approach. It's not a one size fits all. We try to tailor how we approach psychotherapy to who we're working with, to who's in front of us, what their needs are.
The fact that you said that you figure out why people are who they are is self-discovery. And I'm taking EP Lit this year since I'm a senior, and we just finished our existentialism unit. And the second our teacher went, is anyone like, because she was explaining what an existentialist is. Like, anyone think like that? I'm like, all of my friends were like, sure. Because I'm just like a very like, why are we the way we are? Like, what is happening? Like a very existentialist approach of life. And so I'm like, this is really interesting. And I think it's just not as commonly talked about. And I think a lot of people that have different coping mechanisms, and a lot of us are curious, like, why did we choose this? A lot of people that do choose harmful coping mechanisms like substances and what I guess that's the main one. But excess
of things. Really, a harmful coping mechanism, we can kind of define it as anything that's not working well for someone, anything that's causing dysfunction, and a helpful coping mechanism, anything that's working well for someone. So something that works well for someone else, I don't want to come across as too biased. Something that works for me might not work for someone else. Maybe exercise is really uncomfortable for some people, but and would feel dysfunctional for them to be doing exercise all the time.
I mean, another thing I guess that you could approach with psychotherapy is like why people continue to stick with unhealthy coping mechanisms. It doesn't have to specifically be substances. It can be, as we were saying, excess of anything. Why do people continue to partake in excess of something?
Yeah, but that's a difficult question. And I think it really depends on what they're going through. But maybe a general sort of way to approach that question would be that there's something that they're conflicted about, or something that's causing psychological pain, emotional pain for them, and the pain is such that it's difficult to delve into it and explore what's going on, that they continue engaging the way that they're engaging. They continue using this sort of vice that they're using. It might be difficult for them to lift the vice because they depend on it not to be so consumed by the emotional pain. So if somebody's drinking all the time, it might be very difficult for them to be without drinking and have to have these feelings come up that they're maybe trying to avoid, for example. But again, it's very subjective. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're fine. I was just saying suppressing all the emotions will become and I think that's just something that's pretty harmful, because I feel like if we don't face it, it'll just explode later.
It can be very harmful, and it can be very common. Everyone can have blind spots, and that's a part of why psychotherapy can be really important for people, because a psychotherapist can help to illuminate some of these blind spots in a way that's comfortable for someone, rather than somebody finger pointing, out in their life. This is somebody who's here to form an unbiased sort of take on what's going on.
Yeah, and also, I think we were talking about how a community around you is very useful, but I think there's a lot of people in our life that are present before we gain certain coping mechanisms. And I think sometimes people, like, for example, music is the easiest example for this. Let's say you were forced into playing an instrument, which is pretty common in a lot of the communities, especially around me. And you notice that people are forced into things that transform into coping mechanisms, or people are forced to do something that'll better them. And so, do you think sometimes it is okay for other people to introduce things to you in order to help you cope when they notice it's better for you? I guess music wasn't the best example, but sometimes using the people around you to be introduced to different things you can do to help yourself, even when you aren't aware that you need something to help you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that it's wonderful when people try to introduce something to someone in an effort to try to help them have something to soothe any stress that they go through in life, because everyone goes through some degree of stress in life. Speaking of the existential course you're taking, we don't really get to avoid the kinds of different stressors that we can experience, the existential stressors even that we can experience in life. And if somebody introduces something to someone and it feels like that the person, let's say the high schooler, has an authentic, really good feeling about what they're doing, and the person who's introducing it to them isn't impinging on them, getting too much in the way and saying you need to do it this way and etc. I think it can be a wonderful coping mechanism, a wonderful passion for them throughout their life if it really resonates with them and gives them a good feeling inside. Whereas if somebody's really forced, has something forced upon them, I don't think people generally like being forced to do things. And of course, there's things that we have to do in life. There's different hoops that we jump through or different processes that we go through, like school, different structures. But I think that with all of that, when it comes to something that's going to be your sanctuary, something that you go to when you're having a difficult time, you don't want that to be something that's forced upon you. You want it to be something that you've been able to engage with independently and learn and discover in a way that feels authentic and feels good to you. And that's not mutually exclusive from somebody introducing it to you. Somebody can introduce something to you and you can love it,
Definitely. And yeah, I think that's definitely like a very two-way kind of thing. It depends on the person. But I think sometimes it is useful to gain information from other people because you're just not aware of everything possible. But yeah, I definitely think that's present. But I
might not have known. Yeah. I might not have known that the double bass was an instrument because I played bass guitar before then, and I still play bass guitar. But I might not have known the double bass was an instrument had somebody not told me about certain jazz players or classical musicians, for example.
Yeah, that's actually funny. I want to. Well, actually, I don't know why I thought of this. It's not even related. But I'm starting to learn how to play the electric guitar, and so
cool.
Yeah. So I was just like, I was introduced to it by a friend of mine, and I thought it was really cool. And I think that I was never introduced to music when I was younger, and so now I'm kind of transitioning. And I guess it was self-exploration. I realized I found joy in it, so started learning piano and other instruments. And I just think that self-exploration is very helpful.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think a part of what your question was tapping into is that people can get a lot of pressure because there's so much pressure to have all these extracurricular classes and clubs and different extracurricular activities. And that can be really overwhelming. Somebody could be overwhelmed and have an extracurricular that they really feel quite attached to and they really feel passionately about. But, if somebody's feeling forced, and parents aren't giving space for their high schooler to get really into the thing with some space and to find their own authentic passion for the thing, it can be a disruption to it.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really interesting point, and I just wanted to say that I think because college and competitive schools and this pressure and stress that has put around students to transform everything they are interested in into an extracurricular. You like to dance? Well, teach dance and that'll look good on your college apps. Oh, you like to draw? Go to drawing competitions, win something so you actually get scholarships. Every single thing that we've been interested into has been transformed into pressure for college. And I think the reason that there's been, because I guess I was reading an article about this and again, I don't know if it's completely true, but I've heard that there's an uprising in unhealthy habits being built into our generation. Substance abuse, or I guess right now vaping is one, but I wouldn't automatically go there. I just think that a lot of the excess of certain things, I think
you hear a lot about TikTok. Sort of addiction.
A lot of addiction to our phones. We're constantly trying to find ways to relax because the genuine things we were interested in like drawing or painting or our sport, it's been transformed into something that's like giving us stress. So it's very hard for us to find like hobbies that we have. And so we have to kind of fall back on like our phone and just relaxing and find like letting go that way. Those are our coping mechanisms. So I guess that's why this episode was very important, especially for our age group, to understand that like you can still find joy in all of the hobbies that you're doing, even though there's so much stress around it. Yeah. And I think it definitely opens up some eyes regarding how to avoid the unhealthy habits that we're forming. Because, I mean, my own screen time is a little too high. So I think it's something everyone's dealing with. And I do want to ask you, are there any last comments you have for the audience, me, or anything you want to bring up?
I think you just made a really important point that there's so many things that can really draw us in. And I think that was a really good point that you made. I'm not sure if there's an article you want to send me about that came out recently.
I'll try to find it. Yeah, I'll have to find it. I was just reading the news because I it's a good habit I have actually. Before I go to bed, I would read the news, and so I just saw it.
Good. Well, it's good that you're finding things that you can feel engaged with, that make you feel good, that are interesting to you. And to your point, you know, if all of these passions that people can find, and you know, your age group is it's a great time to be exploring and discovering new ways to express yourself and finding new ways to have fun and new ways to learn and things that you're passionate about academically and with anything, sports or with arts. And so if that's being sort of in a way distorted by the competitive nature of it, I think that's a really big problem, perhaps culturally on a big scale. And I have noticed that quite a bit in my practice too. There's just too much pressure nowadays.
Yeah, and I think that needs to be worked on. But I think people like you are definitely helping all of us get through our daily lives. And I think it's very important, especially now if people are dealing with a lot of stress, to go to therapy. I think you don't have to be dealing with a lot to go to therapy. I think it just always helps to have a helping hand. And I really want to thank you for this conversation because I guess it allowed me to get rid of a lot of my frustration, but also help me understand a lot of the ways that we can work with and build coping mechanisms through our daily life.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Akshita. This was great.
Anyway, thank you to all of our listeners and join us next month for another episode.
Thank you guys for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Laugh Out Together show. Make sure to watch all of our other episodes, which can be found on YouTube, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next time.